It is late autumn 1921 and the famous American dancer Isadora Duncan arrives in Moscow. Over the years, she has suffered many misfortunes, most devastatingly the death of her children. So when Russia, a country for which ballet is almost a religion, offered to fund her own dance school in Moscow, she decided to accept. But everything takes on a completely different dimension when she meets the poet Sergei Yesenin, a star of Russian poetry. They fall in love, and the wedding takes place the following spring. But as she will see, even this time the wheel of fortune does not turn in her favor. Isadora Duncan was born in May 1877 in San Francisco, the youngest of 4 siblings. His father worked as a banker, but he did not live with the family for long. His mother left him shortly after Isadora was born, as it turned out that he was embezzling money. From then on, they were rather poor. However, little Isadora loved to dance, and so at an early age, she started spontaneously demonstrating her moves to other children and explaining to them the correct way to dance. At the age of 10, she even stopped going to school. She found it full of uselessness and distractions. Isadora's love of dance endures, and by the second half of the 1890s, she has already honed her own style. Her movements, however, bear only a distant resemblance to the dance typical of the late 19th century. Classical ballet always seemed contrived and unnatural to her, so she danced differently, in loose and often translucent gowns reminiscent of a Greek toga and always barefoot. With her hair down and her hands above her head, she looked almost like a pagan goddess. She jumped around the stage, ran from side to side, and tried to convey to the audience her emotions or even natural phenomena, such as the movements of the sea. Her dancing just doesn't resemble anything America has seen before. And although at the age of 19, Isadora gets brief engagements in Chicago and New York, it turns out that the United States are not yet ready for her art. So in 1898, she buys tickets with her hard-earned money and sails to Europe. As it soon turns out, it's a good decision. Audiences from London to Paris are fascinated by her avant-garde dancing. There has never been anything like it. Isadora Duncan soon becomes famous throughout Europe. Despite having almost no education, she learns French and German fairly quickly, and begins to move in artistic and intellectual circles. In 1904, she fulfills her dream. She opens her own dance school in Germany. Her little charges are nicknamed Isadorables, and she later adopts 6 of them. The only problem is that she celebrates success, but she's not very good with money. So her academy loses money and she herself is famous but in debt. Her love life is also quite complicated. In 1905, she meets the stage designer Gordon Craig, and in September next year, she gives birth to a daughter, Deidre Beatrice. But the relationship soon ends. Craig urges her to curtail her dancing activities, while he himself is married. Isadora leaves him and soon finds a replacement, the son of a wealthy sewing machine manufacturer, Paris Singer. He would give her everything, but even that wouldn't be enough. Isadora leaves him too, even though they have a son, Patrick Augustus. But the failed relationship is nothing compared to the tragic event that takes place in 1913. On a Saturday, Isadora sends the 2 children and their nanny for a drive around Paris. But during the journey, the car's engine dies. The chauffeur gets out and begins to repair the fault, but he forgets to apply the handbrake. And so, when the engine starts again, the car starts down the hill and ends up in the Seine River. Both children and the nanny drown. The devastated Isadora recovers for many months on the Greek island of Corfu, and then spends several weeks in the Italian seaside resort of Viareggio. In a desperate attempt to fill the void left by her loved ones, She begs a random Italian to make her another baby. She does become pregnant with him, but in August 1914, soon after the birth, the baby dies. Isadora tries to counteract the ongoing tragedies with work, and she founds a new dance school in Paris. But in the meantime, World War I had already begun in Europe, and Isadora, now 37, moves back across the ocean. She spends the next 7 years in her native America. But this time everything is different. During her time in Europe, she has built up a great reputation, and suddenly in the United States, her dancing is not considered strange or offensive. She is dancing in New York, her modern productions are popular, and even though she is now over 40, she is still selling out. But once the war is over, she begins to think of returning to her beloved Europe. We are now in 1921, and post-revolutionary Bolshevik Russia has an interesting proposition. If Isadora moves to Moscow, she will be given a luxurious villa, and the state will fund her new dance school. Isadora doesn't think twice and accepts. Nothing in America holds her back. Russia has always been a country promised to dance, and she is also attracted to some communist ideas. She doesn't believe the reports of poor conditions and famine. She starts teaching 20 gifted Russian girls and soon meets Sergei Yesenin, 18 years her junior, a poet whose verses are adored by the Russians. She doesn't speak much Russian, and he doesn't speak much English either, but they fall madly in love. In May next year, the wedding takes place, and Isadora even accepts Russian citizenship. But the more they get to know each other, the more it becomes clear that Yesenin is not only a great poet, but also an unstable bohemian with drinking habits. The relationship sours, so Isadora decides to take her husband with her on a tour of Europe and the United States. She looks forward to Sergei being able to present his poems to the West. But the reality is different. While Isadora is a star, Yesenin with his Russian poetry is of no interest to anyone. He begins to drink even more than before, and when they return to Moscow, their relationship finally ends. Then 2 years later, Yesenin is found dead in a hotel room in Leningrad. According to the official version, he hanged himself. But there is also speculation that the unpredictable poet was removed by the Bolsheviks. Isadora is back in France by now. In 1924, Russia had stopped financially supporting her school, and she had finally awakened from her illusions about communism. The second half of the 20s is rather unfortunate for her. She is almost 50, no longer dances, and often gets drunk in public. She lives alternately in France and other countries around the Mediterranean, and, despite her financial problems, lives on credit in the most luxurious hotels and seeks the company of young men. Her affair with the mechanic Benoit Falchet eventually proves fatal. On the 14th of September 1927, he takes Isadora for a ride in his convertible in Nice. But after a few meters, her long, flowing scarf gets caught in the rear wheel, and a mighty jerk breaks her neck. Isadora Duncan dies at the scene. Her whole life, and her bizarre death, resemble a great theatrical performance in which nothing is missing. Great loves, dramas, tragedies, famous people and world politics that enter into human destinies and turn them into mere pieces on the chessboard of history. Modern dance pioneer Isadora Duncan has experienced enough of everything. This is well illustrated by a statement from the last period of her life. "I was loved like no other woman. Geniuses, poets, millionaires, artists, musicians, they all wanted me. And now there's no one to lend me $25.